Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. So, yeah, I was looking into this today and I was considering this whole idea of, because I was thinking about it, if God was the one who created, as the Bible said, I create the light and the darkness, I form whatever and whatever, I create good and evil. That actually means that God would be the architect of all the evil and all the wrong that's in the world, which led me to the next question. That is, it's somewhat abstract, but it's a logical question to ask. This question of what is the nature of Satan in the Bible? And I was saying to myself, did evil actually exist before Satan chose to sin? Because how could he have chosen to rebel and go against God if evil did not exist? So before the creation of the earth, before the creation of the garden where the talking snake and mudman and rib woman were living, you know, if there was evil, then the source of the evil is God. So I've written up a couple of thoughts here, and I'm very interested to hear what you guys think about this. So if I'll open up the guest box in a bit here. I'd love to discuss this with you guys as well. So what we need to do in essence here is to look at the timeline before the timeline. So before humans, before Eden, before the apple, before theology tells us that there was a perfect realm populated by perfect spiritual beings. And then the story tells us that the highest angel, Lucifer, rebelled. Now that was something that caused me to pause. It then posits that he chose pride and he chose sin. But if you as an investigator looking at a crime scene looked at this, my first question wasn't why he did it, it's how the concept even existed to be chosen. Because for an entity to choose a corrupted path, corruption must already be a variable in that environment. So heaven couldn't be this perfect place before this, because it's baked into the assumption. If a machine has never been programmed with a specific glitch in it, it cannot randomly execute that glitch unless the underlying code or design permits it. So, did Satan invent the concept of evil independently? Or did he simply stumble onto a hidden room in heaven that the architect forgot to lock? This is the question. This is really the question at heart. It follows then that if you hold that God is the sole uncreated creator of all things, then everything that exists, has existed, or ever will exist must trace its lineage back to that single source. And Christians will often argue that evil isn't a thing, but rather the absence of good, like dark is the absence of light. But that analogy falls apart under scrutiny, because darkness doesn't actively rebel, darkness doesn't scheme, corrupt, or wage cosmic war. If Lucifer was created completely pure in an environment of absolute radiant perfection, where did the spark of defiance catch fire? A spark requires friction, and friction requires two opposing forces. If God is everything and God is entirely good, where did the opposing force come from to contaminate a perfect angel's mind? That is the question. Then they will tell you about, it was premeditated. But let's talk a little bit about premeditation. If you go to a court of law, if a manufacturer builds a device knowing that it will contain a flaw that will eventually cause it to malfunction and cause the the operating of this machine to fail. It's not going to function within the exact parameters of its structural limits. God, by definition, in mainstream theology, possesses total omniscience. He knows the end from the beginning. Therefore, at the precise moment of creation, when the blueprint for Lucifer was drawn, the outcome was already locked in. So God knew every thought, every shift in alignment, and the exact moment when the rebellion would trigger. If the outcome was known before the entity was even brought into existence, then the capacity for evil wasn't a tragic accident, it was a pre-programmed certainty. Now, just stew on that for a little bit, right? A pre-programmed certainty. The standard theological defense is that God granted free will to the angels and Lucifer simply misused it through pride. But let's dissect the anatomy of pride. Pride requires a comparison. It requires a desire for self-elevation, for a created being to look at its creator and think, I can match that. A massive cognitive distortion has to take place. How does a perfect mind in a perfect environment generate a distortion of that magnitude from absolute zero? And if you've ever tasted bitterness, you cannot crave it. If the concept of self-exaltation over the Almighty didn't exist anywhere in the cosmic matrix, Lucifer wouldn't have selected it from a menu. The menu had to be written first. If we say that evil is entirely a product of the creature's choice, we run headfirst into a brick wall regarding absolute sovereignty. If God is sovereign, nothing happens without his decree or his permission. If evil arose entirely outside of God's intent, then there is a corner of reality that operates completely independent of his control, which means he is not truly sovereign. But if it did happen within his decree, then evil is a deliberate component of that design. It's baked in. You cannot have an all-powerful, all-knowing creator who is simultaneously shocked and disappointed by his own creation and how it behaves. It's a logical contradiction that forces a choice. Either God is responsible for the baseline existence of evil, or he is not all-powerful. Think about the nature of abstract concepts. The laws of logic, for example, or mathematics, morality. They are often described by believers as reflections of God's unchanging character. If that is true, then for evil to exist as a conceptual opposite to good, it must exist in relation to that character. Did God create the abstract framework for evil as a boundary line? Did he intentionally draw a line in the cosmic sand and say, this side is holiness and that side is an abomination? If he drew the line before creating the angels, then evil existed as a defined architectural reality before Satan even took a breath. Satan didn't invent the dark side of the line, he just walked across it. And who built the line? The only one who could. The narrative of a grand sweeping war between good and evil, between God and Satan, is highly cinematic but logically hollow. It positions two forces against each other as if the outcome were a match between rivals. But if one side created the other side from scratch, knows its every move ahead of time, and knows its very existence in mid-air by continuous will, it's not a war, it is a scripted theatre production. If Satan is checking boxes on a predetermined timeline of cosmic history, his rebellion isn't a strike against the system, it is the engine driving the system forward. The villain is just as necessary to the plot as the hero, which means the director needed the villain to behave exactly as written. So, whether you push a theological argument into this corner, the immediate response will always be, but free will, you cannot have evil without free will. Excuse me. Free will is treated like a magical shield that absolves the creator of all systemic failures. But let's challenge that, right? Is it possible to have free will without the option of monstrous cosmic evil? Believers claim that heaven is a place of absolute free will where no sin exists. If perfection and free will can coexist in heaven later, why couldn't they coexist in heaven at the beginning? If God could design a paradise where free agents choose the good for eternity without the risk of satanic rebellion, then why didn't he start there? The fact that he chose a design that guaranteed a cosmic fall proves that the fall was part of the objective from the very beginning. If a mirror distorts an image, you don't blame the reflection, you look at the glass. Angels are described as reflections of divine glory, designed to worship and mirror the perfection of the source. If the highest, most brilliant reflection turned completely dark, it points directly to a systemic issue. If human nature is broken because of Adam, and angelic nature was broken because of Lucifer, we are looking at a repeating pattern of structural failure across multiple distinct creations. When the prototype rolls off the assembly line and eventually crashes, an investigator stops looking at the drivers and starts looking at the factory floor. Who signed off on this quality control? So there you have it. When you strip away the comforting poetry and you look at the raw logic of the paradigm, we are left with a very stark conclusion. If evil didn't exist before Satan sinned, then a finite, created being possessed the godlike power to introduce a completely new, foundational element to reality that the Almighty either didn't foresee or couldn't prevent. But if evil exists before Satan sinned, then it is an intentional asset in the Creator's portfolio. A tool used to create drama, suffering, and a need for salvation. You can have a God who is all-powerful, or a God who completely separates from the origin of evil. You logically cannot have both. So, what is the glitch in the system? How does one resolve this glitch in the setup? I am interested to know. Maybe this topic is a little bit too lofty and out there, but we can give it another go. Let's see. Let us see who we can get up here. Just give me a second. I'm just going to go for a quick break.